At the couple's gathering, my wife told her friends, "That's my beloved husband." I saw everything, but she pointed to another man, as if I wasn't there. Their smiles, the touch between the two men, everything screamed what the words pretended to hide. I stood up silently and left without looking back. No one tried to stop me. No one called me. No guilty glances. No explanation. Just the sound of clinking glasses and the light laughter of the friends who knew about the charade long before I did. The pain that came wasn't explosive. It was a silence sinking slowly, filling every space in my chest like dirty water seeping under a poorly closed door. I drove for hours that night. I don't remember where I went. I only remember the image of her placing her hand on his shoulder as if it were natural, as if that affection hadn't been stolen from me. I remember how she smiled, a smile I hadn't seen in months. And that's when I understood, it wasn't just betrayal, it was absence. I had already been left long before that night, I just didn't want to see it. She had already left when she stopped listening to me, stopped caring about my days, when she started getting dressed up just to go out alone, when every kiss became a mechanical greeting. What destroyed me wasn't the other man. It was knowing that she didn't see me anymore, that she chose to erase me from her world as if I had been a mistake, and yet, for months, she slept beside me as if everything was fine. The days that followed were slow. Life became a narrow, dark corridor. The silence of the house suffocated me. The picture frames stared at me like mute witnesses to what we once were. I thought about confronting her. I thought about shouting. But there was no point. The truth had already been told with her body, with her gestures, with her contempt. When she returned home 3 days after the encounter, feigning normalcy, as if nothing had happened, I looked at her one last time with the eyes of someone still searching for some truth. But she only said, "You disappeared. Is everything all right? Everything all right?" As if the world hadn't collapsed beneath my feet. As if I hadn't died a little watching her call another man her husband. I just shook my head and said I needed time. "For what?" she asked. "To understand where we went wrong," I replied. But I already knew. I just didn't want to be cruel. Not with words. Because she had already been cruel enough with her actions. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. In the following days, she avoided eye contact. She walked around the house like a guest, with light, quick steps, as if she were afraid of her own guilt. Until, one Saturday, she approached and, for the first time, spoke without disguise, "I think I made a mistake." There were no tears. Just a trembling voice and a gaze that tried to find a fixed point in me. I thought I was in love, but he wasn't who I thought he was. I was feeling alone, empty. I wanted to feel alive again, but I got lost. I listened to her. In silence. Because shouting wouldn't bring back what I felt. Because crying wouldn't mend the hole she opened between us. I just said, "I understand you. But I can't anymore." She begged for forgiveness. She wanted to go back in time. She wanted to rebuild what she had destroyed in the haste of someone who thought love was waiting at the door. But I was no longer there. And it wasn't out of pride. It was for survival. Because once someone makes you feel invisible, you start looking for someone who sees you. And that's how I started to breathe again. Not with another woman. But with peace. I began to reconnect with myself, with my values, with my silences that no longer hurt. She left for the second time. This time, in tears. This time, for real. The silence that remained was the same, but it no longer hurt. It was mine now. And in the midst of it all, without seeking it, without wanting to, someone appeared. Someone who looked into my eyes and not over my shoulder. Who listened when I spoke and made me laugh again. Who didn't compete with my pain, but helped me transform it. There was no rush, no promises. Only presence. Constancy. Care. Months passed. And one day, unintentionally, our paths crossed again. It was in an unlikely place. She entered the room without seeing me. He sat among strangers, with tired eyes and simple clothes. He was there for help. The same help that I, some time later, decided to offer to those who needed it. I was a volunteer now, in that support group. A space where wounded people learned to get back on their feet. And she was one of those who had fallen. When she saw me, she hesitated. She turned pale. But she didn't run away. And when the time came to speak, her voice cut through the air like a knife. I lost the love of my life because I confused presence with routine. I traded a home for a fleeting emotion. And when I tried to come back, it was too late. Because he not only forgave me, but he moved on. And loving someone who's already gone is like trying to light a candle in the wind. No one there knew it was about me. No one needed to know. But in that instant, something closed inside me. And it wasn't resentment. It was peace. She looked at me. And I looked back at her serenely. Because forgiveness had already been given. And love, that, now resided elsewhere. But what nobody knew, was what she told me later, when we met outside, alone, under the cloudy sky of that late afternoon. What she revealed there not only gave meaning to what happened, but changed everything I thought about what our story was. And that's where it all really begins. Welcome to the channel. Here, no form of betrayal is romanticized or justified. Our stories are fictional, but they carry profound truths. Betrayal destroys, wounds, and leaves scars that even time cannot erase. Each narrative is a reminder that love demands respect, presence, and loyalty. Prepare yourself for a shocking, intense, and unforgettable story. Enjoy listening. They met on an ordinary day, one of those days when no one expects anything to change. He, with a restless soul and a reserved way of observing the world, worked as a literature teacher at a private school. She, energetic, spontaneous, with that sparkle that attracts attention even unintentionally, was a psychologist in a welcoming office 2 streets down from the school. Their paths crossed by chance when one of his students, a teenager in silent crisis, was referred for sessions with her. The initial contact was professional, but a longer exchange of glances at their second meeting was enough for an invisible thread to stretch between them. It wasn't an overwhelming passion, but a connection that grew slowly, like wine being decanted in silence, until it filled the spaces. His name was Michael. He was one of those men who listen with their whole body, who don't interrupt, who pay attention to the subtext of words. He was 35 years old and carried the elegance of someone who had suffered, but had chosen calmness instead of bitterness. He carried on his shoulders the responsibility of a home he supported honestly, and in his heart the hope of a simple and true love, the kind that lasts not by miracle, but by constant care. Emily, 3 years younger, was fire and sea. The kind of woman who made lists and ignored them, who planned trips in the dead of night during sleepless nights and cried watching pet adoption commercials. She had a sharp intelligence, a provocative sense of humor, and an intensity that both enchanted and exhausted anyone unprepared to receive her completely. Their relationship began like any healthy relationship usually does, built on long conversations until the early hours of the morning, leisurely walks, and small everyday acts of kindness. Michael would make coffee just the way she liked it, even when he was late for school. Emily would write notes and hide them in her books, wishing her good morning with poetic phrases scribbled in pen. They shared books, movies, reflections on life, and even silence, that comfortable silence of those who don't need to fill their time with words to feel accompanied. Their complicity was palpable, like a silent pact between 2 souls who had found each other after so many failed attempts. When they decided to live together, there was no party, no formal proposal. It happened naturally, like everything else between them. It was a combination of shared keys and drawers, multiplying toothbrushes, matching calendars, and aligned schedules. The small apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building became the home they both desired. Simple, but full of life. Emily bought flowers every Friday and scattered them around the house. Michael insisted on reading Pablo Neruda's poems aloud on Sunday nights. They laughed at silly things, discussed politics, shared wine and bills with the same ease. Time passed, and with it came the phases. As in any real relationship, there was enchantment, passion, disagreements, and reconciliations. During the early years, it was almost impossible to think of one without remembering the other. Friends saw them as a balanced couple, she with her vibrant energy, he with his serene calm. They were the perfect yin and yang, the contrast that worked. They participated in dinners with other couples, group trips, and among acquaintances, they were the epitome of a solid relationship. When they looked at each other in public, there was something genuine in their gaze. Not acting, but the living memory of everything they had built. The relationship, although far from perfect, was stable, mature, and seemingly happy. But time is merciless when it comes to comfort. Emily, in her constant restlessness, began to seek more, not more love, but more movement. She went back to studying, got involved in conferences, increased her workload, and her routine became increasingly full of commitments and tight schedules. Michael, on the other hand, maintained the same pace, preferring quiet weekends, books piled on his bedside table, and cozy dinners for two at home. Gradually, the comfortable silences became silences that screamed. The messages ceased to be spontaneous. The questions became formalities. The hugs became hurried. There was still love, but there was also a growing space between them, invisible, subtle, but increasingly difficult to ignore. The routine slowly changed. Michael sensed her distance, but there were no arguments, no harsh words. Just a palpable absence, a gaze that no longer met his with the same intensity. He tried to adapt, asked questions, suggested trips, but she always had something more urgent, a conference, a lecture, a new patient in crisis. Emily got lost in the rush, justifying everything with the excuse that she was seeking to grow, evolve, build something bigger for both of them. And perhaps, at that moment, she truly believed it. Perhaps she thought that love could withstand the weight of emotional distance if weekends were still shared, if his name was still saved with a heart on her phone. Michael didn't complain. He tried to understand her. But the loneliness of sharing a bed with someone emotionally absent is one of the cruelest. He started coming home earlier, cooking for the two of them and eating alone. Dinners became long silences in front of the television. There were still good moments, occasional laughs, memories that surfaced out of nowhere and reminded them of how it all began. But there was also that weariness that didn't come from the body, but from the soul. Emily felt trapped without knowing why. Michael felt forgotten, even when present. What no one saw was the amount of things he did to keep them together. The therapy sessions he sought out on his own to understand if the problem was with him. The messages he wrote and deleted, afraid of seeming needy. The sleepless nights trying to understand when they stopped being us and became two eyes living under the same roof. Emily still hugged him, still said, "I love you," before leaving, but there was a rush in her gestures, a distraction in her gaze, as if she were always already on her way somewhere else. And Michael, even though he noticed, tried not to see. Because love, when it's true, has this flaw: it pretends not to feel the pain, just to stay close. Months went by like this. The house remained the same, but it no longer smelled of home. The pictures on the walls told stories that were no longer repeated. Friends noticed the difference, but no one asked. Because everything seemed fine. Because they still smiled in photos. They still attended events holding hands. They still wore wedding rings. But the distance between them was no longer just physical or emotional, it was existential. Each was living a different time within the same story. Emily ran as if fleeing from something she couldn't name. Michael waited, as if one day she would return whole to that embrace where she once found peace. And it was precisely in this setting that the invitation to the couple's get-together arrived. An informal gathering, organized by old friends, to reminisce about good times, laugh a little, and toast to life. Michael hesitated. Emily insisted. She said it would be good for both of them. That they needed to reconnect. That they had drifted apart a bit, but that it was just a phase. And he, as always, gave in. Not out of convenience, but because he still believed. Because he still wanted to. Because he still loved. That night, he dressed carefully, put on the shirt she had praised, sprayed on the perfume she said smelled like a hug, and drove with his heart full of expectation. He thought that perhaps this was the beginning of a new cycle. That there, among old friends, among shared memories, they could find each other again. He had no idea what awaited him. And even less, that that night would not mark a new beginning, but the end. The following autumn, when the leaves began to fall like pieces of finished stories, Michael had already rebuilt part of himself. Not completely, but enough to wake up without that dull pain in his chest. After the encounter that turned into a rupture, Emily left home taking only 2 suitcases and a goodbye he never quite heard. There were months of silence. No calls, no messages, no sign. And although he expected some explanation in the first few days, he soon understood that sometimes absence is answer enough. Life didn't stop. School continued, the students too. And amidst rehearsals for plays, reading clubs, and small gatherings with friends who never knew what to say, Michael began to rise. Slowly. Like someone picking up shards with their hands and learning to heal while bleeding. It was during this process that he met Rachel. Not in a cinematic way, but in the improvisation of real life. She was the mother of a new student at the school, and by chance, they ended up talking as they were leaving a parent-teacher meeting. First about education, then about books, then about life. Rachel was different. She wasn't intense like Emily, she didn't set the room ablaze when she entered. But there was a serenity about her that deeply touched him, like soft music playing in the background of an empty coffee shop. They didn't rush anything. There were weeks of sporadic conversations, then a casual coffee, then a dinner that ended in laughter and lingering glances. Rachel listened. She looked into his eyes. She asked questions that didn't come with judgment. She was simple, but present. And that's when Michael understood that love didn't need the weight of drama, it could be light, it could be home, it could be a choice. The relationship grew slowly. And for the first time in a long time, he smiled again without trying. He started caring about small details again, planning weekends together, and feeling the reciprocity. Rachel didn't compete with the past, didn't demand answers, didn't try to fill spaces that weren't hers. She simply walked beside him, respecting the time each wound took to heal. It was she who suggested he join a support group for people who had been through difficult relationships. She said he had something to offer, that he could transform pain into a bridge. At first he hesitated, but eventually accepted. Not because he wanted to teach something, but because he knew that sometimes hearing stories similar to his own helps put his own story into perspective. Helping became healing. And then that day came. The day everything changed again. A cloudy Saturday, with a biting wind and the smell of wet leaves. Michael arrived early at the group's meeting place, as usual. He prepared the space, arranged the chairs in a circle, lit the lavender diffuser Rachel had given him, and sat in silence, waiting for the new people. When she entered, he almost didn't recognize her. Not by her face, that he would never forget, but by her gaze. Emily was different. She carried something on her shoulders that hadn't been there before. It wasn't disguised guilt, nor performed sadness. It was something else. A sincere emptiness. A disarray. She wore simple clothes, her hair haphazardly tied up, no makeup, no pose. She looked around, hesitated when she saw him, but didn't run away. She simply sat down in one of the chairs and kept her eyes on the floor. Michael took a deep breath. His heart raced, but not from pain. It was surprise, mixed with compassion, mixed with that old memory of something that was once love. He decided not to say anything. Not at that moment. The group began. The stories emerged one by one, with restrained tears, hesitant words, long pauses. When it was her turn, the silence seemed to last longer than it should have. Everyone waited. She raised her eyes and spoke. Not to him, but to the emptiness between them. She said she had lost herself. That she believed freedom was synonymous with novelty. That she confused routine with prison and attention with demands. She said she hurt someone who didn't deserve it and that, when she realized it, it was too late. There was no name. But each word weighed on Michael as if time had stopped. After the session, as everyone began to leave, she approached slowly. They stood there for a while, facing each other, unsure where to begin. She said she hadn't expected to see him there, and he replied that life has its ironies. Emily asked for 5 minutes. Michael, though uncomfortable, agreed. They went out onto the sidewalk, where the wind still blew cold, and she began to speak. No theatrics, no beating around the bush. She talked about the days after the separation, about how the relationship that had seduced her had turned into disinterest within weeks, how she was treated as a distraction and then discarded like any object. She said she tried to fill the void with trips, events, people, but nothing made sense. Until she realized it wasn't his absence that hurt, but her own absence. She no longer recognized herself. She lost her reflexes. And then she began to sink. She went to therapy, but it didn't work immediately. She felt shame, she felt guilt, she felt a hole in her chest that no other affection could fill. She spent nights rereading old letters, looking at photos she had kept hidden. She said it was only when she knew he was okay, that he had started over, that she finally cried for real. Because she realized she had lost him definitively. He listened to everything without interrupting. The words no longer hurt, they hurt her. When she asked if he forgave her, Michael said yes. But not because he wanted to relive what they were. But because he needed to feel light to move on. She nodded with tears in her eyes. She said she imagined that, but that she still needed to hear it. That's when she confessed what she had kept to herself for months. She said that the so-called relationship was never love, nor real desire. That it was just a way to feel seen. That the man she was with didn't see her as a woman, nor as a person, but as a game, a distraction, a pastime. She recounted that one day, when she tried to make it something real, she heard him say something that still echoes in her head, "You were fun, but you're not the kind of woman anyone takes seriously." She said that at that moment she felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. And for the first time, she understood what she had done. Not with the eyes of neediness, but with the eyes of consequence. Michael swallowed hard. He wanted to feel anger, but only pity. Emily was broken, and he wasn't the one who could fix her. She asked to see him again. Just as friends, maybe, she said, trying to hide her real request. He smiled. A sad but sincere smile. He said that now his life was taking a different path. That he was with someone who chose him every day. Who looked at him with eyes full of presence. And that he wouldn't trade that for anything in the world. She tried to smile, but couldn't. She just nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. Before they said goodbye, she said, "I loved you. Truly. I just didn't know how." Michael replied, "Me too. But love doesn't survive where there's no courage." She turned and left. And he stood there, looking at the gray sky, feeling a strange relief in his chest. The cycle, at last, had closed. And the only thing left was to move on. In peace. Because forgiveness had already been given. And love, that now had another name, another home, another face that looked at him as if he were the only man in the world. Time followed its course like a silent and relentless tide, carrying away what was no longer necessary and leaving only the essential on the shore. After that last encounter in front of the support center, where the past was finally laid bare and put to rest, Michael didn't look back. He returned to his life like someone closing the last page of a book that had deeply marked him, but which no longer fits on the shelf of his soul. There was no resentment, no bitterness, only a firm certainty: the peace he had achieved was non-negotiable. And for the first time in a long time, he felt that his story no longer needed to be explained, understood, or validated. It simply existed, whole, with all its losses, its silences, and its new beginnings. Rachel was a constant presence. Not intensely or overwhelmingly, but with the quiet strength of someone who chooses to stay, who builds without haste. She didn't try to occupy spaces that weren't hers, she didn't want to compete with memories. She simply offered constancy. Michael gradually realized that true love may never have been about shouting, but about listening. It wasn't a fire that consumed quickly, but a warmth that patiently comforted. They built a life together where there were no remnants of the past, only present choices. And when he decided to propose, one that came from the heart, without pressure or fantasies, he did so simply, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, sitting on the sofa, his hands intertwined with hers, his eyes saying more than any ring could promise. She said yes with the same serenity she always carried, and the life they followed from then on was made of small but true moments. Love, now, was peace. It was home. It was freedom within the bond. Emily, on the other hand, had to face the silence that followed the final goodbye. Not the silence of someone who had been left behind, but of someone who realized, too late, the value of what they had lost. The days became lonely again, not because there was no company, but because none of them could fill the exact space that Michael occupied. She tried to move on. She took courses, traveled, met new people, rebuilt her career, but there was always a void that no achievement could fill. The memory of that man who looked at her with respect, who believed her every word, who chose her without her needing to prove anything, heard at unexpected intervals, in songs playing on the radio, in couples walking hand in hand, in nights when the house seemed too big for just one person. Regret wasn't a constant burden, but a presence that sat beside her from time to time, subtly and precisely reminding her of everything that could have been different. Emily learned to live with it. And perhaps that was her greatest punishment, knowing she had everything in her hands and, for a moment of ego and illusion, let something slip through her fingers that she would never have again. She tried to love again, but the fear of making mistakes, of not being enough, of repeating the choices that had brought her there, paralyzed her. She went to therapy. She cried. She forgave herself with difficulty. And even after everything, she moved on. Not lightly, but responsibly. She knew there was no going back, and the only way to stay alive was to accept that some wounds don't heal, we just learn to live with them. Years later, chance led her to a lecture on emotional relationships and effective bonds, and there, on stage, was Michael, now the author of a book on emotional reconstruction. The audience listened in silence as he spoke, in his usual serene tone, about how love needs to be nurtured, how betrayal doesn't begin with the act itself, but with daily distancing, with a lost gaze, with small choices that seem harmless. Emily stayed in the audience, unseen, listening to every word as if receiving a mirror before her face. She cried softly, her head bowed, not because she wanted to go back, but because she finally understood. When the lecture ended, she left before he came down from the stage. Not out of cowardice, but because she knew their time had passed. And respecting that was the greatest gesture of love she could still offer. As Michael left the stage, he found Rachel waiting for him with their young son in her arms. A boy with bright eyes and an easy smile, who ran to his father as if he had found the whole world in his arms. Michael lifted him into his lap and looked at Rachel with that tranquil gleam of someone who knows he is exactly where he should be. Life, despite everything, had been fair. Not because it didn't hurt, but because after the pain came healing. And, above all, because he had the courage not to lose himself trying to save what no longer wanted to be saved. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about choices. About the scars they leave. About how true love doesn't demand perfection, but it does demand presence. About how emotional absence destroys even before physical abandonment. And about how moving on is sometimes the only possible path when respect is lost. Betrayal isn't just breaking a promise, it's silencing a story, slowly killing the gaze of someone who only wanted to be seen, chosen, loved. And you, what did you think of this story? Leave your opinion in the comments. We want to know how you felt listening to each part of this real and impactful story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next exciting stories like this one, each with a new lesson, a new warning, a new wound transformed into reflection. And remember, this channel does not support, justify, or normalize any type of betrayal. Here, the stories exist to show that betrayal is destroying your own home with your own hands. It's opening wounds that won't heal with excuses. It's trading the certain for the uncertain and ultimately losing much more than you can imagine. It's not worth it. It's never worth it. Until the next story. May it find you whole, or help you to rebuild yourself.